Hey everybody, I'm Jeff McDonald. This is another Spotlight lecture. This time we're looking at thinking and language. Both of these very important to us as human beings, and they are definitely connected, and they connect us to each other. When I'm talking about language, this is our spoken, written, signed ways we communicate to each other, the way we combine words to communicate meaning. And really, this is the main way that any kind of knowledge is passed on from one generation to another, from one person to another. Very important to who we are and what we do. When do we learn language? Well, really, you start very, very young. And you can see this in infants. They can really understand language, and that's receptive language, at about 4 months old. They can begin to produce language, typically around 10 months. What we seem to find is that children who are born first in the family, like a firstborn, will tend to learn language quicker. The later born children will learn language later, primarily because the parents and the other children translate for them. But when there's the first child in the house and they begin to speak and no one understands what they're talking about, they have to learn to speak more clearly and to be able to communicate better. Whereas by the time you have a second, third, and fourth child, then you kind of learn, okay, they want water, they want this, they want that, because you kind of translate for each other. The babbling stage, about 4 months. Then around 10 months, they start to pull on what sounds like language, mama, dada, and so on. 12 months approximately, they'll get to the one-word stage where they'll see a specific object, whether it be kitty, dog, house, cookie, whatever it is. They get to that one-word stage, and they communicate focusing on that main word that they think is important to help them communicate. 24 months, around 2 years old, they will go to the two-word speech, combining a noun and a verb sometimes, but that's about it. And then right after that, they will begin to develop and use complete sentences when they speak. Well, how does this happen? It's a good question. There are more than 700 languages worldwide, and they are all very, very different. So it makes you kind of wonder, like, do we have something in us that helps us to speak languages, that helps us to learn language, and helps us as human beings to communicate? Well, Noam Chomsky believes there was. He believes that we have this language acquisition device that basically helps us as humans, and that we are predisposed to learn grammar, not as much a specific language, but to actually learn grammar rules. And sometimes you can see this with children. You know, when children learn language, when they're learning English, and English is a very difficult language to learn, they tend to make mistakes on the exceptions. You know, when a child is listening to language and they're trying to learn it, they learn the grammar rules without ever really being told what the grammar rules are. For example, they learn that when you have more than one thing, you add an S to it. So you might talk to your son or daughter and say, you know, well, there's a car, and then they recognize that, okay, if you've got one car, you've got two cars, and if you've got one bar, you've got two bars, or if you've got one picture, you've got two pictures. And so, and you say, okay, there's this house and there's that house, and you say, and you've got more than one, and they kind of go houses, and they get that. And then you have one mouse, and then you have two mice, and they kind of go mouses. And you go, no, it's mice. And they think, if house is houses, why isn't mouse mouses? You know, and they learn, and why isn't house heist if it's mouse and mice? You know, they have to learn the exceptions, and that's where they make mistakes on. They learn if something is done in the past. So if they walk here and they did it yesterday, they know to add ed, and they say they walked. And if they talk, they talked. And if they draw, they drawed. And you say, no, you drew. And they kind of go, okay, how does that work? See, it's learning the exceptions that they have to learn. If you say, you give them these words and you give them these examples, they will do well, and they will mess up on the exceptions. But without ever having seen a diagram of a sentence, without being explained grammar, they will learn those grammatical rules. And Chomsky believed that that was really internal, that they were born with that device, and that we were all born with that device as human beings. Other research has said, you know what, there is periods where this happened because children can learn language very easily. But as they start to grow, trying to learn a second language as an adult, they will struggle with it, and they'll even still have the accent of their native language, as well as having trouble getting the new language. And so we learn that with children, they can learn new languages very early, but after this critical period passes, then it becomes much more difficult to learn that second language because you're not learning it as a child. Any kind of damage to the brain can impair this ability to learn. And there's two areas that your book talks about, Broca's area and Wernicke's area, that these are really very important areas in language comprehension and language production. When you look at this picture, you can see where the two areas are. Broca's area is in the left frontal lobe, whereas Wernicke's area is in the left temporal lobe. Broca's area is more responsible for the mechanics of speech. And so sometimes when people have difficulty or have damage to Broca's area, they have difficulty with the muscle movements and the motor skills necessary to produce certain words. And Wernicke's area tends to be more for understanding and comprehending words and understanding the words. Now, sometimes damage can be to both, and there was an example that I saw on a video where this gentleman was a lawyer. He had damage to Broca's area, and he had a lot of difficulty with his motor skills producing words, but he could get through them slowly. And most words he understood the vocabulary. He was formerly a lawyer before he had his stroke. But then there were some simple sentences that when he was given the simple sentences, he had trouble understanding them because of the grammar involved. The one they asked him if he knew a difference between a leopard and a lion. He said, yes, I do. And they said, the leopard was killed by the lion. Do you know which one died? And he kind of looked at the person and said, I don't know. And he said, well, do you understand all the words? He says, yes, but he could not figure out the grammar that just because one was killed by the other, which one died, it didn't make any sense to him. And that's when you have damages to that part of your brain. Another connection between language and thought is Whorf's linguistic determinism hypothesis, which says that language really determines your basic ideas and that words influence thinking but don't determine them. Because when you look at our ideas and our specific cultures, the language that we use, the words that we have for things show how important things are. Like in our language, in our culture, there's lots of words for sex and drugs and money and things like that, but we don't have a lot of words for snow because snow is not really that important to our culture. Whereas in other cultures, that snow is very important. They need to differentiate between all the different types of snow. And so the idea that thought and language are so connected, you know, can you think of something that you don't have a word for or a name for? It's like, which one really determines the other? Well, Whorf basically says that language determines basic ideas. It doesn't determine thinking, but it definitely determines the basic ideas that we use to think. And sometimes people have trouble kind of going back and forth between these two things. It's like when they talk about bilingual parents, they often switch language to express emotions because they can't find the right word in this language, so they switch to another language. So it shows you the complexity of thinking in language and how closely they are connected. And that's it for today's Spotlight lecture on thinking in language. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.